So when we think about the kids that are parts of these families or parts of our communities, some of the other challenges that we need to think about that ultimately affect classroom behavior are things that include poverty, whether it's extreme poverty or generational poverty or somewhere in between. Isolation, feeling like I'm here, my parents brought me here, I don't know what the heck we're doing here, I didn't want to leave. My friends are at home, I'd rather be poor and with my friends, whatever the circumstances might be. Think about the cultural conflicts that arise. Frequent moves. This month we have a couch at so-and-so's house. This month we have a room at so-and-so's place. This month, because of it's blueberry season in Michigan, we're going north. Whatever the reason behind the frequent moves is, it happens, and it happens a lot. We have a lot of McKinney-Vento students in CMS. Reduced exposure to academic language. So if you're riding 17 hours to get to the blueberry field, you probably aren't spending time at the public library. Maybe you have books to take in the car. Maybe you don't. Maybe survival is so important that we don't have time to focus on reading, writing, or anything school related. The role of cultural identity, and think about your own self, your own identity, and how important it may or may not be for you to preserve who you are. When there's some kind of stereotype that's imposed upon them, it hurts their self-esteem. They don't understand why people think what they think about the places that they're from or the culture that they display or don't want to display. And we have also had students that have experiences where they hide clothing in a duffel bag so that they can change clothes at some point between home and school, because I'm not allowed to leave the house looking in a certain way, but I really can't show up at school with the clothing I'm wearing based on what's expected of me at home. So all of those things, and these are kids, they weigh on their minds. They begin to take their toll. And they affect people's behaviors. Sometimes kids are really withdrawn. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're insecure, which means a lot of different things. When we talk about behavior in the context of schooling, I'm just bringing in a few, we could talk about this for like 6 months and not cover everything. I'm bringing in some basic cultural areas, sociocultural factors that impact behavior, and how sometimes we as educators misunderstand things based on these cultural differences. The first one being the concept of time and being penalized for turning things in late versus turning things in incomplete. Because the concept of time, even at the very basic level of having a due date in the context of school, for some kids is very different. Some teachers in some cultures, listen, Robin, you're going to take 2 weeks to do this. Kim, you're probably going to finish in 2.5 weeks. I understand that Anna is going to be done in a week. And I don't mind that you all have different needs for this. So as long as you turn it in and it's complete, it's fine to turn it in. Versus it's due on the 25th of May, and if it's not on my desk, I'm not grading it. So there are some times when there's this massive disconnect between what's more important, when the assignment is done, or how it is done, or a combination of both. And there are cultural misunderstandings about all of those pieces. Thinking about the concept that students will be judged. Some students cannot understand that they're going to be judged about timing. Like, what is this? They don't understand that. And even though we in the culture of power, think it's a socially important rule to learn that you got to be on time. When it comes to turning in assignments and things that are due at school, there are people who cannot understand why my performance, like what difference does it make if I do something at a different speed, as long as I'm doing it well. So that you know what I'm saying? Like we could talk about that for hours. And there's always in many people's minds the thought, well, yeah, but society says you got to, if you're supposed to start work at 8, you got to be there at 8. Not all jobs. And some of the bigger, more successful companies now have asynchronous working schedules. These are your tasks. When you do them is completely up to you, as long as you complete the project. And here's my other question. As you drive down the interstate and you have to cross some kind of a bridge, do you care if the civil engineer who designed that bridge and the construction workers who built that bridge, do you care what hours they did it in? Or do you care whether or not it was done correctly? And being late for some kids, knowing the teacher and what their expectations are, I don't care if I get an F. I'm just not turning it in. Versus, yeah, you're not getting out of it. The other example I love to use is the cardiac surgeon. If you ever have to have open heart surgery, are you really concerned about, well, this operation is supposed to take 6.25 hours, and I'm not going a minute over that. So wherever I am in the process, when I get to the 6.25 hour mark, that's my due date, I'm stopping. Versus, wow, this situation might take 8 hours. This situation might take 2. I don't care. Just make sure my ticker is right. So we have to think about that and find balance, because there's a definite issue with finding balance. Making sure that we find balance between the social expectations and making sure students actually learn the concepts. The other thing is connected to the role of authority and this notion of respect, which is a perfect segue from that, meaning the families that brought their kids to school when they were ready to bring them, it wasn't about being rude or intentionally disrespecting. And a lot of times kids demonstrate behaviors that we feel may be disrespectful when they don't mean it that way, nor are the cultural norms in their life outside of school shaped by that, by those behaviors. So understanding the role of the teacher, and for some kids what that means, and for other kids what it doesn't mean, I think is really important. The other piece is understanding individual performance versus group performance. And kind of how in certain cultures there's this value, a tremendous amount of value placed on solidarity together. And that, it's not about me and my personal ego and I need to do this and I need to do this and I need to do this. This is our team. And that students oftentimes are intimidated when they are asked to do something that demonstrates personal expertise. And our assessment system, this all leads up to what we're going to talk about with lesson planning this afternoon and next week with assessments. Our assessment system is completely set up to promote individual performance, even though that's a huge cultural disconnect for many people and for many careers. Because if you think about what happens after students graduate from high school and move into the world of either work or further studies, how many careers exist where you really completely function in isolation? Mm-hmm. Well, and the whole notion of EOGs, end of grade tests, those were never intended to measure individual student performance. That assessment was created to try and grade schools. So what do? We use it all about kids. Well, that's for scheduling, it's for tracking, it's for placement for next year, when that was never the intention nor the actual functionality of the assessment tool itself. And paying teachers. Yeah, oh, that's another one. We could have 8-hour conversation about that. We're almost to the point where we're going to take a quick break, because I know you guys have been sitting and participating very, very well. Thank you. Bless you. The other thing with culture and school behavior is this notion of nonverbal communication, body language, as well as personal space. And my favorite story involves personal space in line at the ATM machine in Puerto Rico. So in the US, our typical kind of personal bubble is about an arm's length. However long it is, this is my space. Unless I ask you to come in it, please don't come in it, right? Get away, back off. And if somebody doesn't back off, you actually can have that physical reaction where you step back. So in line at the ATM machine here, when you're up at the screen and you're entering your PIN number, if there's somebody behind you, where are they normally? At least a couple steps back. There might even be like a line drawn on the pavement. Well, the first time I used an ATM machine in Puerto Rico and there was more than one person there, everybody was on top of each other. Like, they stand really close to each other. Their personal space is about 6 inches. Like, it's okay for my arm to touch yours. Ah! And I, who was not really that fluent in Spanish at the time, that was another story, I could not believe it. And I actually turned around to the person and said in English, as if they were going to just automatically understand. I'm like, you need to back up. How often in our classrooms do we not even think about that with kids? And the fact that some of them are going to have small areas of personal space and others will have very large. Like, wow, maybe it's 3 arm lengths. The other thing that we have to think about is body language, eye contact. When we want students to listen to us, what do we tell them about their eyes? Look at me. I'm talking to you. You're not looking at me. You can't be listening, right? Hollering at them. Look at me. Meanwhile, in many Asian cultures and other cultures, the ultimate sign of respect when someone is speaking is to look down. So that in and of itself could be something that is so different. The point in bringing this up is, how many times do we as teachers say things without knowing it that offend kids? How many times do we promote conversations with all of the best intentions of interaction and engaging lessons, where students might actually say things that offend each other? They offend each other as their peers. And because they have to follow the rules of the activity, they can't necessarily say something. Or if they don't want to go against the grain of, I can't really say something to my teacher that she or he offended me, so I'm just going to roll with this and keep quiet, until they get to what point? The boiling point. And that's when something behavioral may manifest, where they just blow up. As adults, do we ever have those minutes where you have just, I've had enough? Yeah, of course. And so looking at that and thinking, how can we get people to reveal without being harsh, or how can we get people to gently reveal, you know what, that bothered me when this was said? Because if you had told me, maybe I would have reworded it. And finding balance, again, with helping kids teach each other how to communicate like that gently. To say, come on, man, you can't say it like that. You got to say it like this. So how do we handle this? I mean, that's a great story. You guys shared great examples. How do we handle this with our students? How do we get them to the point where it's okay to have an open dialogue and not be worried that your grade is going to suffer? You know, and that teachers are people, and they are still learning themselves. Well, and that kind of moves into the next couple of pieces with understanding that no matter whether or not you have some kind of collective commonality, people are still individuals. And so, making sure that we treat people as individuals and understand their strengths, understand where we can kind of fill in with open dialogue, and moving toward helping students understand the concept of acceptance versus tolerance. Because we use tolerance all the time. Teach tolerance. Tolerance matters. Tolerance is important. I personally, and this is the view of Joan, not the view of UNC Charlotte, I don't really like it when somebody just tolerates me. That means they're just putting up with me, like, yeah, she's talking again, I'll tolerate it. And I know at home sometimes they tolerate me because I'm the only girl around. You know what I mean? But helping students understand how to accept and appreciate our differences. How do we educate that teacher that you spoke about without offending her? That she needs to accept this in a different way and explain it in a different way. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Reshape their thinking. The other thing I ask my students to do, and if this offends you, just take a deep breath. Because I'm leaving at the end of the day. I'll be back for a while, but you don't have to live with me. So that's okay. The other thing I ask my students to do is step away from what I call the colorblind cop-out. I don't see color. I don't see color. Oh, I treat all my kids the same way. I don't see color. Well, you know what I do? I look at them and say, are you colorblind? Like a Dalmatian? No, you are not colorblind. If you are, tell me, because then you really don't see color. We have to see color. We have to love seeing color and understand that color matters. How do we shift it from it making a negative difference to making a positive difference? Yes. Look for the salad bar with all the different stuff. Yes. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So asking people to recognize that it's a good thing to see color. You should see it. The other piece with this, stereotyping and helping people understand that cultures still have individual people. We laugh because a lot of times, and it's, we have to laugh sometimes when things are painful, but Mexican is not a language. I work with a lot of teachers in professional development situations who talk to me about all the kids that they have in their classroom who speak Mexican. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then we have the conversation about they speak Spanish, maybe there's a Mexican dialect. But ethnicity, do all people from the United States speak the same way? No. It's very, very important. Nationality, understanding that people have deep-rooted connections to where they're from. Our nation is made up of immigrants. Many layers of culture and language within a nationality. It goes generations deep. And sometimes things were shaped because they had to be shaped that way. They were forced. Integration was forced. Sometimes integration was violent. Sometimes segregation was forced and also violent. and that it's important to remember people's backgrounds include all of this. A lot of kids who maybe first generation, maybe second generation, are still walking with that one foot in the home culture, and I live this life at home that nobody knows about, and then when I get to school, I have my other foot in the normal culture at school. And they have to live like that. They literally, in some cases, lead completely different lives. I'm this person at home, I'm this person outside of home. That's a lot of pressure for students. Okay, really fast before I let you jump up and take a quick break, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and if there are two people next to you, you can tell two people. It's okay. Tell them one thing that's like, wow, light bulb moment, something you've learned today about sociocultural considerations within culturally and linguistic diverse students. 30 seconds. Go for it. Finding balance is a discussion that is important, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Because how do we incorporate acceptance? How do we incorporate understanding, yet still kind of hold up our end of the deal with helping students learn responsibility and helping students learn that there is a framework in certain areas or certain parts of society that we have to fit into. The academic factors. We've talked a little bit about the sociocultural factors. Let's look at the academic factors. The way materials are presented. We have to accept, we have to recognize the fact that the curriculum we teach, the curricula we teach, are based on an Anglo perspective. In North Carolina, the essential standards that we use today in 2014 were, I don't know how to say this, developed, created, however you want to word that, whatever verb you want to use, in the late 1800s. As in the late 1800s. We have adapted them a little bit. We've added some terms connected to technology. We've added some other buzz things that make it seem modern. But most of the foundational pieces of our standards still go back to the 1800s, the late 1800s. I don't even really know what else to say about that. That it is what it is. So how do we make an Anglo curriculum multicultural and ethnically diverse and stick to the standards? Because they exist, and we have pacing guides, and we have end of grade exams, end of course exams, all kinds of assessments. It's a very difficult task. Understanding too that we have academic tasks that need to be completed where students don't necessarily connect with the fact that they will be judged about their progress. So I have to complete this task because somebody's telling me I have to do this, but what does that mean in terms of long-term progress? And what labels do we place on kids, even subconsciously, based on individual tasks rather than long-term demonstration of progress? Motivation. How do we keep kids engaged? How do we keep them interested? How do we keep the curriculum and all of the things that go with it interesting for kids who may not connect with something as easily as we think they could or should? And how do we adapt the physical environment of our classroom, the physical design of our classroom, to promote some really heterogeneous conversations, academic conversations, and cultural connections? Has anybody read the book? The actual title of the book is Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? It is a phenomenally interesting book. Because by human nature, we segregate ourselves. When we make jokes as well that when Americans go overseas, they look for McDonald's. Even if they have to pay 50 cents a pack for their ketchup. Because it looks normal. I want to be with people who look like I look, who seem like I seem, who understand who I am. So how do we actually help with the physical design of our classroom? Yeah, the segregation, the self-segregation is different in different areas. Absolutely. Important point. Okay, impact of language. What kind of language is used at home? And I don't mean necessarily a language other than English. Maybe it's really informal. Maybe it's its own dialect. Maybe it involves curse words. I know it does in my house. We have a jar. When you live with guys, I'm gonna tell you, when you live with guys, sometimes, you know, the language is colorful. And so we decided that we would have this jar, and when colorful words come out, the person who says them has to pay. And at the end of the month, the person who has paid the least gets to take all the money out of the jar. Scary truth, I always pay the most. Scary. I always pay the most. I'm like, what? Blip, blip, blank, blank. So, you know, it's not always the guys that are messing up. It's, you know, the one girl in the house who has to, like, colorfully describe how they're messing up. But when we think about this, the language, how do we teach kids that it's okay to have that language at home, and when you come to school, it's time to use this language? And we have to use certain kinds of language when we write, and certain kind of language when we speak, and sometimes they're similar and sometimes they're not. And when we speak to our kids, our friends, that may sound differently than when we make a presentation in an auditorium with a whole bunch of parents. So we have all these different levels of discourse, all these different levels of spoken language. And what is the language that we read? And sometimes how books are written matches what we think how they'll read, and sometimes it doesn't. Whether it's vocabulary or tone or a combination of both. How native language impacts academics and identity is really important. I'm going to skip the pieces about brain research for today, because what I want you to do is get ready to do we're going to have what we call a carousel activity. And I want you to think about some things. You're going to take a break until 11:30. I want you to start thinking about your own classroom management approach and your own classroom management plan, if you have one. Does it involve clothespins? Does it involve a red light, a yellow light, a green light? Does it involve anything structured so the students know, I might be moving from good to I'm not so sure I'm good to I'm in trouble?